Britain's highest court rules that suspension of Parliament was unlawful. 8 babies die in a hospital fire in Algeria. And 4 EU nations reach agreement on how to share migrants. Hello and welcome to CGTN. This is Africa Live and I'm Karen Roberts in Nairobi. Also coming up in the programme. In business, Egypt begins construction of Africa's tallest building in their new administrative capital. And in sports, Lionel Messi and Megan Rapinoe crowned the top of the world at the FIFA Best Awards. We begin in Algeria, where 8 babies have died after a fire ripped through the maternity ward of a hospital there. According to emergency services, the incident occurred just before dawn in Oued Souf, a city near to the Tunisian border. Responders reportedly managed to rescue 11 babies, 107 women and 28 staff. Dozens of fire engines have been deployed to bring the blaze under control. The cause of the fire is not clear. Algerian Prime Minister Noureddine Bedawi has ordered an inquiry and has also sent the country's health minister to the scene of the fire. The Supreme Court in the UK has just delivered its verdict on Boris Johnson's decision to suspend Parliament, saying that it was unlawful. The court had been asked to decide if the PM acted illegally when he suspended Parliament for 5 weeks before Brexit. Meanwhile, in New York, US President Donald Trump has been holding a bilateral meeting with his Egyptian counterpart, Abdel Fattah el-Sisi. This was part of a day of interactions between world leaders at the annual UN General Assembly. At their meeting, Trump strongly backed Sisi after anti-government protests broke out in several Egyptian cities late on Friday, calling for Sisi to step down.
Yes, everybody has demonstrations. Even your best friend in the whole world, President Obama, he had a lot of demonstrations. No, I'm not concerned with it. Egypt has a great leader. He's highly respected. He's brought order. Before he was here, there was very little order. There was chaos. And so I'm not worried about that.
Let me say that you will always find
tell me again
something
in a
like
minute.
this in our region, especially with political Islam. There have been efforts that have been put forth for many years to make sure that this political Islam is having a role on the political arena, and consequently, this part of the world will remain in a state of instability as long as political Islam is around.
To some developments now on global migration, and 4 EU countries have agreed a new deal to automatically distribute migrants arriving from across the Mediterranean Sea. If approved, the deal will welcome migrants rescued in the central Mediterranean and relieve the pressure on southern EU states. It hopes to end the long, drawn-out negotiations that have seen vulnerable asylum seekers, including babies, stranded at sea, sometimes for weeks.
If everybody puts himself in the shoe of the other minister, we will be able to reach an agreement. Actually, that's what we did, and it is why there is an agreement of a common paper that will be presented to the councils of ministers of Home Affairs on the 8th of October.
I now call on all member states to join us in our work to establish a more predictable solidarity mechanism and to participate in solidarity efforts.
It is the first act of an agreement, a first concrete step for common action in the European approach. I found it a very positive atmosphere because migration policy is a policy that has to be made together with other countries. I must say that we have always said in the past years that he or she arrives in Malta or Italy arrives in Europe.
Meanwhile, a charity rescue vessel which rescued 182 people at sea is due to reach the port of Sicily in Italy. This is after Italy authorised the Ocean Viking to disembark the people there. The decision put an end to 5 days of suffering. The news has been well received by the migrants aboard the vessel in the Mediterranean Sea. The dozens of men, women and children aboard the humanitarian ship celebrated as the migrants carried medics and rescuers in their arms and paraded them around the decks while singing and dancing.
I'm so full of joy. I don't know what to say now. I'm so happy. I'm so happy. No more back to Libya.
We just announced the news that we can disembark in Messina in Italy. So of course, very spontaneously, everybody is enjoying a lot. There is a lot of relief on board, and we are all very happy about that.
Well, let's now return to breaking news. The Supreme Court in the UK has ruled that the prorogation of Parliament was unlawful. Let's now go to CGTN's Richard Bestick, who is in London for us. Well, there were 3 days of hearing appeals last week. Now the 11 judges have ruled that the suspension of Parliament until the 14th of October is unlawful. What happens next?
Well, let's just say that ruling from the Supreme Court judges, all 11 of them, was unanimous, combined with the recommendation that the House should resume business. It's been welcomed as a decision by the Speaker of the Commons, John Bercow, who says the House will now resume as quickly as possible, giving Parliament and members of Parliament that opportunity to scrutinise the draconian plans by UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson to exit the European Union without any kind of transitionary trading arrangements in place. What's called a no-deal Brexit, just crashing out. The Supreme Court has ruled that suspending Parliament was to achieve a cover for that action rather than, as the UK government argued in the Supreme Court, an act of preparing for a Queen's speech when the monarch, Queen Elizabeth II, outlines the government's plans for the year ahead.
So
that's what's going to happen. Karen, the real impact now is what the political ramifications are of that.
Well, that was going to be my next question. I mean, this is uncharted territory. And of course, Parliament and the Constitution, what happens now?
Well, you're absolutely right. This court case, the very fact that the Supreme Court, that the legal system was being called on to make judgments on the actions of the British government is completely unprecedented and rips up an agreement that existed between the legal and political pillars of the British establishment dating back 300 years. Clearly, there's a major impact for Boris Johnson, the UK Prime Minister. His authority, his credibility as a manager of Britain will be severely dented. And the opposition Labour Party, currently having its own party conference in Brighton, will no doubt make the most of that. They will hit on that immediately. But then, of course, Parliament comes back and it can begin all sorts of actions to ensure that Britain doesn't crash out, as Boris Johnson has said he will do. He'd said that he would rather be dead in a ditch than not see Britain out of the UK, regardless of what measures were in place in preparation by October the 31st. Do or die were his words. They will now have the opportunity to scrutinise his ability, stop him crashing out, and then it looks really, Karen, like Britain's into a Brexit election. within the next coming months, I would suggest.
So, Richard, obviously this is a big blow for the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. What are his options? Is he likely to resign, do you think?
Well, a very good question. Downing Street is saying it is examining the ruling. You can imagine that there are nuances, subtleties in there when you get 11 of Britain's strongest legal minds putting their attentions to a single problem. You've probably got 11 different versions. It was significant that they all came to the same conclusion, their verdict unanimous. Now that raises the question of when the Prime Minister gave that legal advice to Queen Elizabeth, the monarch, as to suspending Parliament, whether he misled her. And there will be those studying the judgment to see whether there is any indication that he misled the Queen. If that was the case, he would be under severe pressure to resign. I think it's unlikely that Boris Johnson will resign as a consequence of this. He may see it that his options are now closing. He's lost control of Parliament. He's lost control of the Brexit agenda. The agenda for the Brexit agenda is in Brussels is moving against him. And now Britain's legal establishment is saying he acted unlawfully. His options are closing down. It's quite possible that he might say, right, let's go for a general election. The problem is that Parliament has already voted against that. He would need to find a method for which a general election would be triggered. And then he could go to the public and say it's the public against Parliament, a dangerous manoeuvre in itself. They won't allow me to go for Brexit. Let's have a general election and see who wins and take it from there. That would be one option for him. Resigning as a consequence of the ruling from the Supreme Court, I don't think he'll do that.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that. That was CGTN's Richard Bestick there in London on the ruling that was announced just about half an hour ago now, that the prorogation of Parliament was unlawful. Let's move on to other news now. Ethiopian officials have confirmed that suspected members of the Somali militant group of Al-Shabaab and Islamic State were planning to carry out attacks on various targets, including hotels in the country. The National Intelligence Security Services issued a statement on Saturday saying that it had arrested an unspecified number of alleged militants, some of whom were carrying out intelligence work, allegedly, including photography of potential targets. Ethiopian intelligence coordinated with neighbouring Djibouti to detain the suspects, including the alleged leader of Al-Shabaab in Ethiopia, Mohamed Abdullahi, Deputy Chief of Ethiopia's military. Berhanu Jula told the state-owned Ethiopian news agency that there is evidence that the extremist group has recruited, trained and armed some Ethiopians. Other members of the militant group are still at large and are being hunted down. Well, CGTN's Giram Chala is following this story in Addis Ababa for us. Giram, what more can you tell us about these arrests?
So these arrests first were made perhaps beginning of last week, because the Ethiopian Army Deputy Chief of Staff Berhanu Jula, General Berhanu Jula, was the one who first talked about this, and now the National Intelligence and Security Services is disclosing more information about these important arrests made. First, we know that these people were in their early 30s and mid-30s at the same time, and they came through Djibouti from Somalia and Somaliland. Conflicting informations are there to allegedly stage attacks on hotels and also kill government officials, according to the information we've got. And they were collecting information within the country, in different parts of the country, by the way, and they even have IDs, identification cards, from Ethiopian cities. And these arrests are said to be important arrests, according to the National Intelligence and Security Services and the Defense Forces, as they have avoided perhaps what could have been a dangerous attack against Ethiopia and its sovereignty. This is what we know so far, Karen.
And Giram, how serious is the militant threat in Ethiopia?
Well, it is serious and it's not serious at the same time. It is serious because Al-Shabaab has been trying to attack Ethiopia for a long time. As you remember, since 2009, Ethiopian forces have been involved in securing Somalia, and there is also a battalion which is outside of AMISOM itself, and there is also another one from Ethiopia inside AMISOM. So Ethiopia's presence in Somalia is significant and important, and it has been fighting Al-Shabaab for a long time. And as Al-Shabaab is affiliated with Islamic State itself, it's also a threat not only for Al-Shabaab but also for Islamic State. And these groups have been trying to, attack Ethiopian cities, Ethiopian authority buildings, and also officials at the same time for quite a long time. We remember a few years back there was a football match happening in this country, and some of the venues were under threat, and perhaps that could have been a dangerous attack. So for that reason, Ethiopia is always under a threat of Al-Shabaab attacks and Islamic State at the same time. No, I said no because Ethiopian security forces have managed to lower those attacks into zero, and we have never heard of any significant attack within the Ethiopian territory by Islamic State or Al-Shabaab militants, despite the fact that there are trials again and again. So Ethiopia is under threat, but at the same time, the security forces, the intelligence service has managed to avoid any attack. So in the future, we'll see if that's going to be the case. But now we know that these arrests made recently are very important achievements for the security forces here.
And finally, Giram, have the authorities said whether the suspects may be brought to trial, when they're likely to be brought to trial, and what will they be charged with?
So the first stage of this is arresting them and finding the locations of this potential Al-Shabaab militants and IS militants at the same time. They've managed to arrest many of them, as we've been saying earlier. There are, however, people who are still at large, but the officials, including the Deputy Chief of Staff of the Ethiopian Army, is confident that we have eyes on them and we can arrest them anytime, he's saying. So after this, they have collected information. We have heard, including the photos that have been taken to be used for the attacks they have been intending to stage. And I'm sure that in the coming week or so, they will be facing justice at the same time and taken to court, according to official sources that we have. They will be charged, of course, of staging terrorist attacks within the Ethiopian territory and attempt a murder at the same time. Ethiopia has its anti-terror law in the country, and it will use that law also to try these people. And as foreigners, there is also an international law which is going to be used against these people at the same time, which is going to also refer to terrorist acts across border crime at the same time. So we'll see when they're going to stage, but in the coming week or so, these people arrested will be facing justice within Ethiopia.
Okay, thank you very much for that update. That was CGTN's Giram Chala there following the story for us in Addis Ababa. We are going to a short break now. Don't go away, lots more to come, including thousands of Britons board planes back home after collapse of Thomas Cook travel agency. And exploring Nigeria's taste for dogs as a delicacy in the northern regions.
In 70 years, China has undergone unprecedented transformation. From its old industrial base in the northeast to its new manufacturing powerhouse in the southeast and to its emerging southwest. CGTN offers you a panoramic view of contemporary China. Our crews will travel along 3 different routes and come to you live from dozens of locations and 3 mobile studios. Join us for an all-inclusive look at China on our TV channel and digital platforms, September the 9th to the 20th. It is New China, then and now. in celebration of the 70th anniversary of the People's Republic of China, only on CGTN.
I've learned how to code in a simple way.
Together with other young people, we're able to make this difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
An A380 Airbus, the world's largest commercial airliner, was dispatched by Britain on Monday to bring home stranded passengers in Turkey following the collapse of travel agent Thomas Cook. The travel giant was liquidated on Monday and currently has 600,000 people abroad, forcing governments and insurance companies to coordinate a huge rescue operation. The UK Civil Aviation Authority said that it had a fleet of planes ready to bring home the more than 150,000 British customers over the next 2 weeks. Meanwhile, in Greece, hundreds of tourists queued at the airport in Corfu on Monday, waiting to board flights home. Many said that they were disappointed with the situation. The collapse has led to the largest peacetime repatriation effort in British history, which included governments trying to organise flights for passengers stranded at various airports. One British tourist said it was a disappointing end to her holiday, while other travellers expressed concern for Thomas Cook staff who have lost their jobs. The collapse of the UK travel firm has affected some 3,000 tourists on the Greek island, a popular tourist destination for British tourists.
Very sad that for what's happened for all of Thomas Cook and all the employees, and everyone's doing what they can, but it's really disappointing that the holiday has to end like this. But you know, fingers crossed that everything gets resolved and that people find new jobs and the businesses don't suffer too much as a result, and Greece, you know, keeps on going as a #1 tourist destination.
And we are probably one of the lucky ones. We've had our holiday, but there's lots of people who are going to be very, very disappointed, and we just feel for the employees as well.
We've been given no information at all by anybody. We've just been brought to the airport late, and we're now told we might not even get a seat on the plane. So I think it's really bad that no one is here to help.
Well, let's get you some more on this from Giles Gibson, who is joining us live from Frankfurt. Under what arrangement are these planes taking the British tourists back home?
Yeah, this operation that's being run by the British government for people who are trying to get back to the UK only, we should stress, is being called Operation Matterhorn. We had an update from the government at the end of the first day of that airlift operation on Monday. They said they'd run 64 different flights and approximately 15,000 people had been returned from their holiday destinations, stranded after the collapse of Thomas Cook, and brought back to different cities in the UK. But really that number of 15,000 is just a drop in the ocean compared to the number of British-based customers who still need to be returned. The UK government are saying that there are still 135,000 people who they need to return. So this operation is really just getting going. And that's before we get into all the different people who are trying to get back to other countries other than the United Kingdom.
And Giles, what next for employees of Thomas Cook across the world?
Well, certainly for the UK-based staff, they are facing an incredibly uncertain future. But really the other arms of Thomas Cook, the other international subsidiaries, it's a very different story depending on which country you're in. For example, here in Germany, Condor Airlines, it's a subsidiary of Thomas Cook. They are still actually running flights and have been throughout the week, even after the news of the collapse of Thomas Cook. Although the airline's future is also far from certain. They've applied for a $220 million bridging loan from the German government to keep their flights going, to keep their planes in the air in the short and medium term. We're expecting a decision from the German government about that bridging loan in the next couple of days or so.
And finally, what about the bosses of Thomas Cook? There's been a lot of criticism of them, hasn't there?
Yeah, even the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson has weighed in with some of that criticism, talking about how these high-paid executives were still receiving very, large salaries right up until the collapse of this company, which surely, partly has to be blamed on the leadership of the company. In terms of the repatriation of other citizens here in Germany, that sort of responsibility is expected to fall on the shoulders of insurance companies rather than the German government running something similar to the UK government. But really, it's still going to be days and days until everybody who is stranded somewhere by the collapse of Thomas Cook actually gets home, gets back from their travels or back from their holiday destination.
OK, thank you very much for that. That was Giles Gibson reporting for us there in Frankfurt. Moving on to other news, Britain's Prince Harry and his wife Meghan Markle kicked off their Southern African tour by putting on their dancing shoes. The royal couple are in South Africa on their first official overseas trip since the birth of their 4-month-old son Archie. On Monday, they were in Nyanga Township, that's also known as the country's murder capital. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex visited the Justice Desk, that's an NGO working with vulnerable children, expressing solidarity by referring to herself as a woman of colour and as your sister. Meghan commended the work done to counter violence against women and children.
I read a quote a few weeks ago and it resonated with me as I've been watching what's been happening here and your active efforts. Maya Angelou, a legendary poet and civil rights activist, once said, "Each time a woman stands up for herself, without knowing it, possibly without claiming it, she stands up for all women."
We're truly inspired by your resilience, your spirit, your sense of community, and your belief in a better future for everyone here. I applaud you for the movement, and we know that you haven't been heard before, but change is coming. Now is the time to come together as a community, and we applaud those of you who are leading the way for South Africa's ongoing transformation. Thank you.
Egypt has begun implementing a comprehensive health insurance program. It replaces an outdated system in place for decades and offers cover to all sectors of Egyptian society. It was first launched in the northeastern city of Port Said. CGTN's Yasser Hakim filed this report.
The city of Port Said is home to about 1 million people. It's the first phase of the new health insurance program applied by the government.
The comprehensive health insurance program covers all types of treatments, medication and hospitalization for all Egyptians, whether rich or poor, free of charge. And if there is no treatment in Egypt for a certain illness, the patient will be treated abroad free of charge. To ensure good service, there has been a major upgrade in the infrastructure of the medical sector.
A strong infrastructure has been put in place to complement the new health insurance system. It includes 7 new hospitals out of 10 and 25 new medical centers out of an expected 35 in Port Said. Procedures to register are simple and fast.
There is a nominal registration fee to apply plus the IDs of the family members because the insurance is not for individuals only but families. For those who cannot afford the registration fees, they will be fully subsidized by the government. They will pay nothing.
In only just over a month, 55% of Port Said residents have applied. That's about 500,000 people.
My daughter had an open heart operation. It was done by Sam Magdi Yakub's team. The operation went very well and the service is excellent and we paid nothing.
Hospitals in Port Said have now become of the highest quality. All of them, including the old Nasser Hospital.
Port Said is the first city to adopt the health insurance program. It will then be applied in another 5 cities and should completely cover the whole country in 10 years. Yas Hakim for CGTN, Port Said.
All of the business news coming up for you after the break, including Egypt begins construction of Africa's tallest building in their new administrative capital.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Kenya's central bank has held its benchmark lending rate at 9%. The bank argued that inflation was well anchored within the government's preferred range and that the economy was operating close to its potential. The Finance Ministry has started cutting non-essential spending to reduce the fiscal deficit from close to 6% of GDP. This is amidst analysts' concerns over the pace and the depth of those cuts. Year-on-year inflation dropped to 5% in August from 6.27% a month earlier, helped by falling food prices. Despite benign inflation, the economy has been hit by a slowdown in the private sector credit growth. This is mainly due to a cap on commercial interest rates imposed by lawmakers in 2016. Nigeria's central bank held its benchmark interest rate at 13.5%. While announcing the bank's decision, the bank's governor, Godwin Emefiele, said holding rates steady would allow the bank to appraise the impact of current policies. These include changes to the loan-to-deposit ratios at banks before determining what shift, if any, was needed. Emefiele added that tightening credit could constrain fragile economic growth, while loosening it could allow inflation to rise. The central bank in March cut its benchmark interest rate to 13.5% from 14% in a surprise move. The move was part of an attempt to stimulate growth and to signal a new direction. It was the first rate cut since November 2015. Chinese developer China State Construction Engineering Corporation is building what is expected to be Africa's tallest building in Egypt. The building, called the Iconic Tower, is located in the newly established administrative capital. CGTN's Yasser Hakim visited the site and filed this report.
The new administrative capital is a huge project to move about 10 million people to a new city east of Cairo. A major sector of the new capital is the business district, being constructed by a Chinese company.
This was a huge project, as you know. It's about the phase one. We can say it's for $3 billion. It consists of about almost 20 towers. 12 of them is offices, commercial office, and 3 offices, 3 buildings for residential, and hotels, 2 luxurious hotels, and 1 hospital. Recently, we just awarded phase 2. Phase 2, it's almost also 20 towers.
Over 2,000 employees, half of them Chinese, are working on the business district.
This is our living camp, and about 30 buildings in it. And all the Chinese laborers and managers live here. We have a restaurant. There's 2 basketball yards in this area, and we have a basketball game during the last 2 weeks, and it's not finished. Maybe during the next 1 month we will finish this basketball game. We also have some others, for example, the table tennis.
At the center of the business district is what's called the Iconic Tower. It's a 400-meter building which is for multi-purposes such as business, hotel and residential. This place is expected to be the largest tower in Africa when ready. Known as the iconic tower, it will include a hotel as well as residential and business units. The brilliance here is not just in the height of the tower, expected to be the highest of its kind in Africa, but how it is being constructed.
Two very important key technology. For example, you see the climbing framework, the blue one. It's very famous. It's the first time the SpaceX introduced this very advanced technology to Egypt, and it's very famous and very useful in used in China. But it's the first time we bring this technology to the Egypt, and we planned 3 boom-type tower crane. You see, we have installed the 2. This is the boom-type tower crane. Quantity is very large, and we need to finish this part work in very short time. So we use by means the chute and the autumn pump. Use these 2 methods to pour this concrete. Finally, we create 3 records in the pouring.
This process would speed up the construction period. One floor would take an average 15 days to build. Here, only 5 days. It's a new system that has never been introduced in Egypt before. The iconic tower is expected to be ready by 2021. Yas Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
South Africa has raised $5 billion in its biggest Eurobond sale to date. The deal was split between a $2 billion 10-year tranche and $3 billion of 30-year notes, yielding 4.85% and 5.75% respectively. The initial price talk was around 5.25% for the 10-year offering and 6.125% for the longer securities. Average yields on South Africa's dollar bonds fell 163 basis points between the start of the year and early September to 4.7%. South Africa last came to the Eurobond market in May 2018, issuing $2 billion of 12 and 30-year debt. The government's 2019 budget stipulated that it would raise the equivalent of $2 billion on international capital markets. A further $2 billion is outstanding from the 2018 to 19 fiscal year. Dogs are said to be man's best friend, but that's not the case in some parts of Nigeria, such as Plateau State. There, dogs are slaughtered for meat. It's not just a delicacy for locals. They believe it's also medicinal. CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam has more.
A massive dog market lies here in the local town of Pangxing, the north-central region. Dogs are bred here, not to end up as pets, but as food. One strike to the head, and that's the end. They're either boiled, roasted, or grilled locally. The most favorite is the local barbecue, popularly known as suya. That's the only business that Chocho has spent the past 10 years doing. It turns out a very lucrative business for him.
It has helped me a lot. I have employees of my own. They are able to feed their families. For instance, if I purchase a dog for 10,000 naira and pay 500 naira for the roasting, 500 naira for the pepper, and another 500 for other expenses, I could make as much as 15 to 17,000 naira as profit.
In the end of the day. Elsewhere, eating dog meat may be strange, but it's an age-long culture which many here have known all their lives. Not only is it a delicacy, locals also believe it's medicinal and it's capable of driving away evil spirits.
Dog meat is sweet and it is very good for the body. If you eat dog meat, no evil or witches can come near you.
We grew up seeing our parents eating dog meat. It's what we inherited. We can't stop it. There's no negative side effects to eating dog meat. In fact, the fat is rubbed on children when they are ill or given to them to drink.
The canine friend remains a companion to majority of Nigerians. They're still kept as pets and for security too. And to those sets of people, eating dog meat remains a taboo. Kelechi Amekalam, CGTN, Plateau, Nigeria.
We are going to a short break now. Don't go away. Lots more to come, including South Africa's Gallagher Convention Centre in Johannesburg transformed into a comic book playground.
Join us in global business and see Africa through our eyes.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Panata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
China has signed an agreement to establish a vocational training centre in Egypt. The centre will be built using a Chinese grant of $7 million, and the trainers will also be from China. CGTN's Yasser Hakim has more.
The Chinese Vocational Training Center is an important step to improve the investment climate in Egypt.
This center includes a comprehensive complex in the AIN Sokna area aimed at improving the quality and skills of laborers and technicians in the production sector. They will learn how to use the latest upgraded equipment and machinery from different industries. The training complex will house the trainers coming from abroad with all recreational facilities available for them.
The center will also focus on training in information technology and artificial intelligence. It will be established in the economic zone of the Suez Canal.
China has shown special interest on the economic zone of AIN Sokna because it's located on the Suez Canal. The Suez Canal is an integral location of the Belt and Road Initiative launched by China, and it looks like Europe with Africa and Asia economically. A protocol was signed with last year to develop a new phase of the economic zone to attract $5 billion worth of investments from China. These investments will need skilled labor.
The center will serve in strengthening economic ties between China and Egypt.
Chinese investments in Egypt reached $7.1 billion, while bilateral trade has exceeded $13 billion. Egypt is the fourth largest trading partner with China in the Middle East, and there is a strategic partnership that opens the door of the other African markets through Egypt.
Besides the industrial city at the Suez Canal, Chinese investments are in the real estate, vehicles assembly, electronics, renewable energy, and the new administrative capital. The Chinese Vocational Training Center will not only serve Chinese companies, but having better skilled workers will make Egypt a more attractive destination from foreign investments worldwide. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
South Africa's Gallagher Convention Centre in Johannesburg has been transformed into a comic book playground. Comic Con Africa is taking place on South African soil for the second successive year, and it's so far been a hit. CGTN's Julie Sher reports.
Thousands of heroes, villains, princesses and ordinary people descended on Comic Con Africa in Johannesburg. This Geek Fest is fast becoming the most loved convention on the continent, bringing in over 40,000 visitors over 4 days, many of whom get to transform into their favorite superhero and comic book characters.
So I think you go to expos, but nothing that you can really express yourself and just be crazy. And I think everyone's dressed up, and it's just this vibe that you don't get anywhere else. And I think, yeah, it's just a lot of fun.
Okay, I've chosen Tony Stark because, first of all, he's got a great personality. No one gets the drop on him. He's very witty. And I just hope they keep everything going, that they keep the universe safe in my absence, and I love them 3,000.
I think I'm loving it. It's a great experience. It's great to see all the adults relive their childhoods and see all the superheroes come out to play.
The event's taken a more serious turn, attracting sketchers and illustrators from both home and abroad.
A lot of people in South Africa, for instance, have never even been out of the country. So for them to get that opportunity to network with the international talent, to showcase their expertise, because we've got some amazing talent in this country, and I think we sometimes forget that.
It really gave me confidence to actually share more, because before Comic-Con I never used to really share my work. It was like set in my computer or library somewhere. So it's been something that has actually allowed me to actually open up more.
The taste of the people for some characters and some kind of stories are very different than in the rest of Europe, for example. So I love it to see this kind of different things in every convention.
There was some disappointment at the lack of more big-name stars. Anthony Mackie, who plays Marvel character Falcon, cancelled once again.
We were so sad that Falcon didn't make it. We really wanted to see him and meet him. We were going to meet him, but hopefully he comes next year.
Comic-Con Africa continues to attract unprecedented numbers, and there's no doubt that pop culture is gaining traction on the continent. Judy Shah, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
We've got all the sports news coming up for you, including